Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Building Stronger Relationships with Your Partner After a Cancer Diagnosis. I think everybody should be able to hear us at this point. And if you have any problems, please enter those problems into the chat box and we will handle those, okay? And just a little homework here. Housekeeping. All of you will be muted for the duration of the webinar. So again, if you have technical problems or if you have a question for the presenter, just type them into the chat box and we'll answer those. And please note that at the end of the webinar, you're going to be directed to a survey. Please take a moment to fill out this survey. And this is especially important if you are going to be requesting CEUs. We're really excited to announce that we are now offering CEUs to nurses through the Oncology and Nursing Society. There's a couple caveats here. In order to receive those units, you need to be registered for today's session. So if you're listening in on somebody else's computer, that won't count. And you also have to be listening for the entire webinar if you want to get the maximum number of credits. So within 1 week of this webinar, you also have to complete the evaluation, the one that I'm sending to you I'm redirecting you to right at the end of the webinar. So if you forget to do it today, I will send you a reminder by Friday at 5 p.m. And note that this evaluation is going to ask for your name and email address, and you have to include these pieces of information because that is how we will mail you the certificates, okay? If you have any questions or experience any problems with this process, just email us at info@triagecancer.org. So, for those of you who don't know who we are, Triage Cancer is a national nonprofit organization that provides information and resources on cancer survivorship issues. We provide this education through a few different ways. First, we host a Speakers Bureau of experts on all types of cancer survivorship issues, and we make those available to organizations who are putting on educational events. So if you need a speaker for an event, you can check out our speaker bios and request a speaker on our website. We also host and participate in events all over the country, and I mean all over the country, for patients, survivors, caregivers, advocates, and healthcare professionals. For more information about our events, you can also visit our website. We have monthly webinars, and the next one is on April 19th, and it's about cancer, intimacy, and sexuality, which is really a perfect companion to today's webinar. We have the full listing of the 2017 schedule on our website, and we want to make note that on the June 21st webinar, which is going to be an update to our healthcare system, we will be offering free CEUs to social workers as well as nurses. So that's exciting. And finally, we have a lot of online resources and tools available for free. For example, we have charts with state laws about employment, disability, and healthcare insurance and related issues. We have quick guides on various topics like employment, finances, privacy, clinical trials, and more. And these are sort of designed as a snapshot of a particular topic. And lastly, we have an educational blog and e-newsletter where we post late-breaking news about cancer-related legal issues and other happenings around the cancer community. Now, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Allison Schaffer. Allie is the manager of Patient and Family Centered Care at the Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center. In this role, she oversees the management of the Patient and Family Resource Center, the Hope Connection, clinic volunteers, pet and music therapy, and the Vanderbilt Oncology Expressive Arts Committee. Additionally, Allie collaborates with medical professionals and local and national organizations to plan and implement educational programs for people impacted by cancer. Allie graduated with a BA in psychology from Emory University and a master's degree in social work from the University of Georgia. Okay, Allie, you want to take this away?
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to say a huge thank you to Triage Cancer for inviting me to talk about this really important topic. And I also want to thank each of the attendees that's on the line today who has an interest in this area. And I hope that each of you will get at least one beneficial piece of information that you can take home into your own relationship or your own work with patients and caregivers to support their well-being. So let me first say that today, this webinar is a starting point. And while I plan to cover a lot of material and information and share lots of rich food for thought, please know that this will not give you all of the answers or solutions or fixes to your relationship issues that are currently existing. This is, again, a starting point. And the goals that I'm going to attempt to achieve today are to talk about the impact of cancer on relationships, to help normalize feelings and responses, do a brief review of research, and then most importantly, share tips and tools for couples to navigate relationships and cancers. And then, because I'm going to end on time, we're going to have a few minutes for questions and answers as they might come up. So as I began preparing this talk, I did it with the assumption, and I use the word assumption on purpose, that this group on the webinar today represents a mix of professionals as well as people with active cancer, those who are in active treatment, partners or spouses, and people who have completed treatment and transitioned to survivorship. During this talk today, I will attempt to speak to all of these roles, but because that is a lofty goal, I'm going to ask and invite you to adapt this information I'm providing to your situation, to wherever you are in your life, in your professional role, in your personal experience. I don't want you to ever discount that you are an expert in your life, your relationship, and that's an important part of this conversation. I can certainly provide you tools, but you have a lot of information that's going to be incredibly valuable to achieving your goal of strengthening your relationship with your partner after a cancer diagnosis. So just to begin, cancer is happening to both of you. I really liked this quote because I felt like it clearly illustrated cancer is a crisis. So let's set the stage. What are we talking about? What is this impact that cancer has? Cancer equals change, and very few of us like or welcome change. So this image serves to remind us of all of the different ways that cancer might change an individual's life. It doesn't mean that all of these are happening to you or will happen to you, but you might be able to pick out some of the things that are most prevalent right now, or you might be able to reflect on what was previously a trigger or a soft spot for you, or you might be able to identify some of these categories as future things that might be changing. Cancer is often at times like a bull in a china shop, wreaking havoc on people's lives. And so it touches all of these different categories and areas of your life. And for additional review to set the stage, I want to look at cancer and the impact of cancer from each person's perspective, each person's unique role in this scenario. Because we often get stuck in our particular role and forget to consider the impact on others. And it's really important to honor and respect what each person in the partnership might be juggling. So let's start first with some issues to consider with the patient and survivor, and just looking at all the different ways that cancer might impact the patient and survivor. So again, this can be really important if your role is the professional, if your role is the person experiencing the cancer or experienced the cancer, and for your partner to understand what you might be experiencing. So I would imagine nothing this feels super surprising, but it just is an in-depth review of what are the issues to consider. How might this be impacting the individual with cancer? We're now going to move to what the partner and caregiver might be experiencing. And as you can see, some of what the partner and caregiver is experiencing is the juggling of multiple roles. not only holding the emotional, physical, logistical, spiritual, financial, sexual impact of the partner's diagnosis, but also of having to juggle and own all of the different things as it relates to their life, to changes in the role, and to the family. So you'll see some of the different little cartoons that just kind of illustrate the different roles that a partner might be taking on. It is not likely, again, that all of these issues are happening at once for the partner, caregiver, or the person with cancer, but there might be some fluid movement between these issues, and depending upon your individual circumstance, certain of these issues might be bubbling up to the forefront. I also want to say, if some of these issues don't speak or resonate with you, that's okay. Here's an opportunity not to pick up additional issues or to create more problems than are currently existing. Now let's move to some of the issues for couples to consider. Oftentimes with a cancer diagnosis, couples are initially confronted with the cancer diagnosis and they try to carry on as usual. I want to make the point that this is a mistake. Some of the things and issues that are impacting the couple are the ability to do normal couple activities. And again, that means different things for different couples. There are often impact to intimacy levels, ability to have physical impact, ability for desire for impact. Certainly, there is a change of roles for both the patient and the partner that often impact the couple in really significant ways. And then there's also the external factors of how the couple is navigating extended family, community, and friends. Some of the common responses of couples can be the conspiracy of silence. This feels really big and scary to talk about, so I'm just going to hold myself and my stuff and the things I'm feeling over here. And each person often does that, and then you wind up feeling so isolated and alone and divided as a couple, when if you are able to connect and to share your experience, you can often come closer together and realize, wow, they're experiencing very similar things that I'm experiencing. Often within a couple, pre-cancer, and even without cancer, one person is often a minimizer and one person is a minimizee. And this can flare up some responses, but cancer can often exacerbate some of the pre-existing dynamics. And then life as usual. And again, cancer equals an impact on lives, and it is not life as usual. You might get to a point where it feels more routine, but to pretend that life carries on as usual misses opportunities to create some meaningful and positive changes. So now that we've reviewed some of the different roles and the points of view, let's also consider some of the different factors that impact coping, as this can contribute to the issues happening in the relationship. So let's look at some of these different factors that impact coping. And again, as you review this list, you might see things that are immediately impacting you that resonate very loudly as to things that are happening in your relationship or to some of the things that are impacting your own coping. This is all food for thought and gives us the opportunity to gain more information and to gain more insight into what's happening in your relationship, to understand what might be the triggers, what might be some of the sore spots that are creating more hurt, more sadness, more disconnection, and more difficulty within the relationship. What are some of the active issues that are in play, contributing to either the building up or the breaking down of your individual relationship? And the biggest part is, can you get curious with what's going on and what's impacting and influencing your relationship without judgment? And I want to say that again. Can you get curious about what's happening in your relationship, either individually or for your partner or as a couple, without being judgmental? This is all new information, all new experiences. And when we get curious and then judge the information, we're doing ourselves a disservice. So just being able to get curious and understand what's happening. So again, different factors that will impact coping of the individual or of the couple as these are being brought into the relationship, either pre-existing dynamics that existed in the relationship, pre-existing experiences that happened with cancer, or things that are currently happening as a result of the active cancer issue. Now that we've addressed individual perspectives and factors that impact individual coping, we're going to talk about the individual relationship. So as you can see, we're taking a broad view, and now we're going to hone in to look at the actual relationship that's happening right now and how does this impact things. Where are we at? Let's get a lay of the land, a state of the union, if you will. Let's get an assessment of what's currently happening. Without an understanding of where you are, without an understanding of where you've been or where you want to go, it can feel even more confusing and overwhelming to figure out how to untangle the current situation, how to wrangle out of the place you are and feel better, be better, and have a stronger relationship that you want to have. So I would ask you, if you are a person with cancer or a history of cancer, if you are the partner of someone with cancer, if you are a professional, it's a really important opportunity to assess the state of the union and what's happening with the relationship. Some of the questions that can be helpful to understand the relationship, things like what's currently working, what's not working, what's changed as a result of cancer. And you can even include, what do you desire to be different? Because this represents an opportunity to create some change for the better, for the good of the couple. And it's important to think about where you want to go. What do you desire to be different? Instead of just having lots of random things about should be different, should feel different. Should is very dangerous thinking. And I also want to take this moment to look at, once we have a sense of the state of the union, some of where we're going to go is with the idea and the notion that the couple and the relationship could be used as a positive touchstone for coping, could be a source of strength to move forward and to positively adjust to a cancer diagnosis or to the transition into life after a cancer diagnosis. If the relationship has already been a source of comfort or a source of strength, it might be easier to access the support and the strength of the coupleship after a cancer diagnosis. If the relationship has not been a source of strength or a source of support or something that's able to be leveraged, it might require thoughtful work and intervention to shift this coupleship into a place that feels positive and supportive. It will require different kinds of work depending upon the starting point. I would imagine that makes sense to each of you listening. Every relationship is different. Every relationship starts at a different point, and every relationship is trying to grow to a different place. It also depends on the willingness of each person, and we're going to get into that a little bit more later. It is very common that some couples may benefit from professional help, as it can be awkward to start making the shift on your own, even with some of these very practical tools that we're going to talk about. Professional support can serve as that neutral party and guide to create perspective and to share tools and information that will best support the coupleship. Let's talk about different strokes for different folks. With and without cancer, people cope differently. So that's an important piece of this puzzle, is we can't discount people's unique and individual coping strategies that existed before cancer, maybe exacerbated during cancer. So it raises up all sorts of different responses to the cancer experience. As a generalization, when under stress, many women have a tendency to want to connect with others and talk about their feelings and fears, whereas men, as a generalization, tend to process their emotions alone and be very comfortable in the task-oriented, solve-it, fix-it role. These differences of response to coping can create misunderstanding and increased conflict around what I need and what my partner needs, and this can create additional challenges. Even if both people are well-intentioned, if they're activating and utilizing their different coping techniques You might be missing the mark if you're not able to hear and consider the other person's coping responses being different than yours. Not better or worse, but just different. This quote really resonates. As you can tell as we go along, I think that some well-written quotes are incredibly important to illustrate what's happening. And this one really struck me. Any catastrophic illness, but cancer especially, forces people to look at and deal with many things they didn't pay attention to before. So take advantage of that and view it as an opportunity to make your relationship stronger. So can you, in this moment, thinking about your relationship or the relationship of couples that you're working with, can you consider and utilize cancer as an opportunity for change? Can this be an opportunity to try something different? If nothing else, you can blame me. You can use this webinar as new information and a new starting point to make some changes in your own life. You can go home and say, hey, I just listened to this really great webinar today, and she brought up all sorts of new information and new topics, and I'd like to talk to you about them. So again, today is a starting point, and this is a starting conversation. Now we're going to move into what does the research show? And I apologize that the next 3 slides are a little text heavy, but some of this information is important. So it's one thing for me as a professional with many years of oncology social work experience to talk about what I've seen in day-to-day work with patients and families. And it's also important to talk about and address what the research shows, because ultimately we are trying to offer and deliver and disseminate evidence-based research and what's currently happening. So this first study that's noted at the bottom of the slide talks about, and I've given you a brief overview of the results and then also some of the next steps. One of the things I want to point out is the third bullet, that clinical lore suggests that partners, particularly men, may be more likely to abandon their marriage during and after cancer. The research actually shows that there is no evidence to support this contention, when in fact studies indicate that marital satisfaction is not significantly different from population norms, and recent work supports that nearly half of women with breast cancer and their husbands report that cancer brought them closer together. Now, I realize this is a small number, and this last part of that sentence specifically talks to women with breast cancer, which is not the general population of cancer couples. However, there's a lot of urban myth out there that says, oh, post a cancer diagnosis, most couples divorce. This is showing this is not true. And this might be really important to give to your couples if you're a professional, or this might be really helpful as a couple to hear, no, actually, there can be positive outcomes after a cancer diagnosis. So this is to dismantle myths that can create dangerous assumptions that might lead to things getting worse because you assume that's just how they're supposed to be. Going back to the beginning, another important part of this study showed that it is important to view cancer from a relationship perspective, to use the language spouses versus patient and caregiver. So again, it's going on that notion, can you leverage this coupleship to create support and create a foundation to help better cope with a cancer diagnosis? Some of the next steps that you can focus on, one, there needs to be more research. It's also important to consider how you can continue to use the couple as a unit of analysis throughout the research project or throughout the research process. It's also important to do a lot more research with a lot of different kinds of couples, a lot of different types and stages of cancer. It's also important to consider when and how you would implement a couple-focused intervention, how you can adapt this type of intervention to meet the needs of various subgroups, some of which I've listed. Another article talks about just communication, how it can be incredibly useful and for couple-based interventions to include communication skills training, because communication is really the seat and the root and the foundation of the coupleship in which people make sense of cancer, they engage in social support, negotiate roles, and coordinate coping resources. So it's probably no surprise to any of you that a good couple-based intervention would include work around how to communicate. Some of the next steps as it relates to this communication is understanding the different ways that people communicate. When do people talk about their cancer experience? And as we talked about before, pre-existing communication patterns and preferences, which can impact an individual or couple's ability to cope with a cancer diagnosis. And how or when are you going to administer these interventions? And how can you do that so it's both structured and individualized to that couple that you're working with? So again, this is all food for thought. This next study just kind of talks about another article, again, that's referenced at the bottom of the slide. And I see people are asking about if you're going to get the slides after the webinar, and I'll make sure we address this. I don't know the answer to it, but I'll make sure that we do address it before the webinar is done today. So this last research study that I'm talking about just looked at 14 different studies evaluating couples intervention where one partner is facing cancer. 8 showed that couples intervention, again, looking at the couple, not just the individual patient or partner, there is improvement in well-being for patients. It also showed 8 studies that reported overall improvement for partners. An additional 5 studies showed partial improvement for patients, and 3 demonstrated partial improvement for partners. This shows partial effectiveness. You can see some of the lack of clarity and what might have contributed to that. And one of the big takeaways of this, at least for me, was this raises the notion of how should these psychosocial interventions be delivered? At what point in the illness and treatment should they be delivered, and how long should they continue? This is a really big question. This is actually many questions within one sentence, because all couples are different. All couples are starting at a different point, and all couples may be ready for intervention, if at all, at different points in time. So how do you create one prescription for every couple that is both structured and tailored and based upon the evidence? It's a lofty goal, but I think that with continued research, it can be really useful. So this research that I've just gone through is really important to talk about. What are we seeing from the studies that are being done? What is happening among the work to address couples-based intervention to support coping with cancer? But let's be clear. Many of you who are on the call or might be touching couples with cancer don't necessarily have access to these trials, don't necessarily have access to these very specific couple-based interventions, and or as a professional, you might not be at a center that's participating in these type of research. So all of that is great, but what does that mean for the average person who's doing this on their own or might be doing this in tandem with a professional that doesn't have access to this information or these research studies? Or if you're a professional, what do you do? So that's where we're going to get to talk about the nuts and bolts and some really practical things that I hope are going to be the most useful part of this webinar today, that are common and simple ideas that can be applied regardless of your setting, regardless of where you're at in the country and what you have access to. So I like this little graphic because I think it's important to consider that cancer for many people and for many couples feels incredibly laden with loss of control, loss of power. And so this next section, I really want to dig into the tools that can provide an opportunity for you as an individual, as a partner, as a couple to regain control and to feel more empowered. And again, this is also to talk about some of the practical things that you can do now, that you can do today, or that you can start to implement whenever you are ready. So what can you do as a couple or as a clinician? And some of the things that we're going to roll through might sound and seem like common sense tools. And I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but the reality is this is a lot of common sense. These are a lot of basic ideas, because often when we are in the thick of it, and Cancer gets pretty thick at times, we forget the basics. So this next section is really about how we can come back to the basics and utilize the basics to rebuild or to build or to strengthen the existing foundation in whatever state it might be in, to strengthen and benefit your relationship. So here we go, the empowering C's. What you can do. Communication. This is a biggie. And no matter who you talk to at any point in time, you are not going to be able to talk about impacting a relationship without somehow touching on communication. And I want to remind you that you, regardless of what your role is, are an expert and have expertise. If this is one of those areas in your coupleship or in the couple that you're working with that has broken down or could use some attention and rebuilding, or you might say, wow, my partner and I have great communication skills, but this makes me stop and think about that there are some conversations that need to happen and haven't been happening because we've both been avoiding them. So now it's time to get honest. It's really the best place to start. What are your communication skills and how can you benefit from beefing these up a little bit? And just some ideas and things to consider when you're communicating, discussing all of your feelings, creating safe space, listening and acknowledging the other person's feelings, even if you disagree. And I know it can be so challenging. Some tips for how to create a successful conversation. Take relaxing breaths during, before, and after. Asking for a timeout if you need it. Using I statements. This is so important because as we're creating connection through communication and conversation, if there is blaming language happening, it can be alienating to the person who may truly want to hear and understand what's happening and truly want to understand your experience, which requires the use of I language. And what I mean by I language is, I'm feeling this way. I'm upset, instead of every time you do this. So hopefully you can hear the difference between blaming language and owning your feelings with I statements. Being willing to ask for help. While you are an expert in a lot of things, you may not know everything, and it is okay to ask for help. You might find yourself in a new situation as a result of this cancer diagnosis, and so ask for help. It's not a bad thing. Assumptions can be incredibly dangerous. We all know the language of what happens when you assume. And when we go into a conversation, when we communicate with another person, and instead of listening, we just make a lot of assumptions, we wind up leading ourselves down a very unhealthy, unhelpful path. And then we might start reacting from that different place that is solely based on false assumptions. So coming back to the truth and being able to listen to what's actually being said. And remembering that sometimes you just need someone to listen. And so you can say that up front during a conversation. I need to talk right now, and it would feel really good if you can just listen to me. I'm not asking you to fix it. Can you just listen to me? Can you do that? So setting up the tone of the conversation and what's needed. Here are some communication topics that you may want to use. This could be a place for you to start, and this can, again, be a place for you to evaluate where are the gaps in your communication, where are the topics that you haven't been covering or you need to bring back into some regular ongoing communication to support the partnership. This list, for some of you, may feel incredibly overwhelming because every one of these might light up as a gap or something that's not being discussed. And I want to acknowledge that it can be really hard to cover some of these communication topics, but you get to choose where you start. Maybe for you, you can look at this list and say, okay, today I can start with a baby step. And so this particular topic, getting back to couple time, feels like the safest, easiest place to start. Or you might decide that you're feeling ready to jump in the deep end and just take on the big one. And so you may want to start with the toughest topic, intimacy and sex. That might be the most difficult thing. And I picked that because we often get pretty squirrely when talking about sex and intimacy with and without cancer. So that can be a hard place for some people. But you might decide that today this is the topic that you want to tackle with authenticity and with a desire to really improve this in your relationship. And remember, this is an ongoing process. Communication is not a one-time thing that you have and it's resolved. So sorry again to ruin any notions that this is going to be a one-and-done sort of conversation or communication. Communication is an ongoing process. You have a little bit of communication, you try some things. You have more communication, you try things again. It's definitely a process of trial by error. And many of these topics are really big, so they're not going to be addressed, resolved in one conversation and in one communication. So a lot of people are thinking, great, communication, we have to do it. But we've never talked about this before. Oh, God, I get so embarrassed talking about this. My partner never wants to listen to me because every time we talk, I start to cry. Or it never seems to be the right time. Or we're both exhausted. Or I don't even know what to say or how to start. These are all very common. You are talking about and considering talking about things that feel incredibly personal, that might feel incredibly vulnerable with someone that you care about. So it makes a lot of sense that you're going to have a lot of walls come up when you start thinking about talking about subjects that mean a lot to you and feel potentially risky to open up some of these doors and these lines of communication. Again, meeting with a professional can be really important and helpful to learn how to communicate. You can also blame it on me. Use our webinar today as a starting point to go home and say, hey, this just came up and it made me think that maybe there's a lot of things that we could benefit from talking about. You can even start with what you know, which is, wow, we have a lot of barriers to communication. Maybe we can start talking about those. So again, finding safe and easy ways to open up the lines of communication. So switching into our next empowering C, and again, I'm moving quickly through these because I want to make sure we get them all covered and still have time for some questions. So creativity, this is another incredibly useful tool. How can you and your partner identify new solutions to problems? They might be the same problems that keep coming up, or they might be new problems that are entering the relationship based upon where you're at. So how can you creatively solve them? Can you create space to experience emotions that might be something you've never done before, either individually or together? Can you approach cancer as a we disease? And I know for some couples and individuals that might feel really hard because it's happening to me. He doesn't understand, or she doesn't have to live with these long-term ramifications of cancer. But the reality is this is happening to both of you. And so how can you come together on the different points of how it's impacting you? Create some time for fun. This is so, so important. Fun doesn't stop. Life doesn't stop because of cancer. It oftentimes feels like it does. But creating cancer-free zones where maybe you say, hey, let's go take a walk this afternoon and let's not talk about cancer. This might feel impossible. So you might spend the entirety of that walk in silence. And that's okay, because the next time you do it, you might find it a little bit easier. So again, trying new things, creating some healthy habits in the couple that maybe haven't been happening before. For those of you who are sitting in an infusion center, can you create a date in the infusion center? Most times now there's at least a curtain, if not a private room. Can you do something fun? Watch a movie together, have your favorite foods, do an activity that feels enjoyable. So creating something positive. An activity idea I listed at the bottom of the slide, and again, I'm sorry, I think you're seeing the slides, but a couple's journal. You know, this has worked for a lot of people. Can you find and remember and keep at your fingertips the things that brought you together. How did you fall in love? Can you retell the story? This might help you to remember the good times, so when it feels really hard, you can easily access this. Can you document the current good times that are happening? And it could be very, very small, just that we laughed tonight at dinner, or we didn't talk about cancer for 5 minutes, or we got to go on a trip that we didn't think we were going to go on. You can also use a couple's journal to document future talk. Now, this can be a precarious subject and task depending upon the individual prognosis, and the topic of future talk might need adjusting. Future might be a month versus years. So using this and adjusting it to whatever makes sense for you. Curiosity. We all love Curious George and his curiosity and the trouble that he got into, but oftentimes in the end, everything always worked out okay. So it's time to consider something different. And how can you use your curiosity to serve you? How can your curiosity support and strengthen your relationship? How have you grown from this experience? And these can be things that you talk about or just acknowledge in yourself. Can you get curious about how you coped? How have others coped? What's working? What's not working? Identifying triggers. If you know that you are having intense fatigue and this is really creating a lot of struggles in the coupleship, how can you use the knowledge that fatigue is a trigger for you to have difficulty? And how can you communicate this and use the relationship and the coupleship to support you? If you know that every time you have a chemotherapy, this creates anxiety or this creates challenges because of the logistical changes in schedules. I have to go to chemo, so my partner has to take care of the kids and take off work. How can you get curious about how to better manage some of these logistical, practical, emotional issues that are coming up? And can you anticipate some changes in the schedule or the roles and communicate this information with one another? And I say if possible, because there's a lot of unexpected challenges and schedule changes that come up as a result of cancer, but sometimes we know that there's going to be some changes, and we can get curious about how that's going to impact things. Consistency. Cancer and the tasks of cancer, the appointments, the infusions, the follow-ups, are often incredibly disruptive to the routine and to the schedule, which provides a lot of safety and normalcy to the coupleship. So when cancer comes in and really just wreaks havoc on consistency, it throws everything off. And so how can you utilize consistency to serve your relationship? The thing at the bottom, engaging in routine self-care. This is sort of a plug that you cannot have a healthy you cannot have a healthy couple if you do not have a healthy you. So part of strengthening the relationship also involves tending to routine, consistent self-care of the individual. So if this isn't happening, maybe this is your starting point. If it feels too big to talk about these things, if you're too exhausted to get creative, maybe you can acknowledge, wow, I'm not doing self-care, and this is a place that I can start to strengthen myself, which will in turn create a ripple effect and hopefully a positive impact on the relationship. So consistency, how can you create that routine? How can you take back what cancer has taken away? This next one, we all love Sesame Street and the people in our neighborhood. So while it seems kind of silly, this is actually pretty important. So how can you access your community in new or different ways to strengthen and support your relationship? So some of the things for consideration: are there support organizations in your community where you might be able to connect with other couples who are dealing with cancer? Could you use your community to hire babysitters that could help you to have either individual self-care time or couples date night? Those can be important ways to access the community. If you are also realizing that you are exhausted and you have too many things that you're juggling, could you look into the community for a meal delivery service, which are pretty much everywhere now? And could you use a meal delivery service so that you're not having to spend time prepping meals, but instead could choose to use that time for something else that could better support the coupleship. Certainly, if cooking is something that you and your partner enjoy doing together, you might want to keep that in the mix, but it's just getting creative with the community things that are available. Could you use your community to engage professional support to help you and your partner through this current experience? Could you access the community to try new activities? What is out there? Not everything that you access in the community or look for has to be cancer specific, but can you use it to meet your cancer needs that are happening right now? And this next one, I'm going to go ahead and let you know, is kind of one of my favorites. And it is a professional coup that I have managed to put cheese dip into a professional talk. And I think it's super relevant, or at least it is to me. So cheese dip, this represents the opportunity for you or the couples that you're working with to find the thing that works for you, that works for them. So as an individual and as a couple, you get to find your comfort thing that when you want it or nothing else is going to do, that's just what you need to help the situation. So for me, it's cheese dip. That some days, that's the only thing that's going to help. That's the only thing that might help me feel good, that might help get me through a moment. And so my partner knows that when I say, let's go get some cheese dip, that things are maybe kind of dire, that I need some time and space, and I just need to check out in my bowl of cheese dip. And so that's a sign that that's where I'm at, and this is all I can do, is eat cheese dip. And so in those moments, because we've been through this before, what I need is support and listening, and maybe my own bowl of cheese dip, and certainly without judgment. So as a couple, you get to decide what's your comfort thing for no other reason than it feels good and it gives you what you need in the moment. It doesn't mean it's going to solve everything, but it might give you a little bit of comfort. It might create a little bit of stress release to aid you getting to the next moment where you can create better solutions. This last one is just kind of a reminder and also a little bit of a tool that cancer can be a catalyst to positive growth. So there's often this kind of natural thing that happens that over time people have studied and termed post-traumatic growth, which is that psychological change that occurs as a result of one struggle with a highly and challenging, sorry for the typo, stressful and traumatic event like cancer, that there can be positive outcome, positive growth that happens as a result of this very stressful experience. It doesn't mean that there's going to be positive growth for everybody, because for some people it's not, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong or you've missed the boat or that you have to have completely uprooted and changed and grown in your life as a result of cancer. I'm not adding that to your already big to-do list, but it's just the notion that cancer can be an opportunity for growth. It's not a catalyst for everybody. It's certainly a possibility, and it's an opportunity. And for some individuals, for some couples, it can be the upswing of the pendulum. For every action, there is a natural and equal reaction, that this can be some good that comes from the bad. And sometimes it just happens naturally because people are compelled to make changes, because they are compelled to do some things differently, that they find positive outcome and positive changes, that they go back and say, wow, that's a result of my cancer diagnosis, that if I had never had cancer, these things wouldn't have happened in my life. It doesn't mean that you're grateful for the cancer, but it means that you're grateful for the things that happened as a result of your cancer. And this quote again, couples face cancer and they share pain together. Note the focus on couples sharing it together, happening to them together. But they also have the potential to share in the gain from trauma. And there's never a time frame on positive growth after cancer. There is more research that shows when some of it is anticipated to happen, but I don't want to lock anybody into having some calendar and timeline in their head of when they're supposed to grow from their cancer, but just to know that it may happen to you and it may be an individual experience. So a couple of things to remember. Again, we have gone through an incredibly heavy, dense amount of information today. And so I just want to help and offer these reminders that it's really important to just start somewhere. Where you start isn't nearly as important as starting. Another reminder is don't try to tackle this all at once. If you try to go home and do every one of these things from the webinar today or ask your couples to do it, you're setting yourself up and the couple for failure. And then you're going to be in worse shape and feel worse than you were before you started. So try one thing at a time. Maybe you start with something small. Maybe you want to tackle something really big. However you start, it doesn't matter. Patience is certainly huge in this process. Change takes time. It's not always easy or comfortable. And so coming back to your goal, remembering your desire of why you're asking for change, why you're engaging in different behaviors to create change in a relationship can often keep you moving in the right direction and keep you honest and gentle with yourself when things don't go so well. The two bottom ones about forgiving beginner mistakes, and you can always try again tomorrow, is to remind yourselves that even when you try everything right, even when you have a great conversation, even when you use I statements, even when you have the best of intentions, it may not always work. So be willing to fail and be willing to try again tomorrow with the information that you've learned, with the curiosity that you've had, with the creative problem solving, with the clarity and the willingness to do something different. So these are the little tips of the things to remember. This is a big task. This is a big undertaking. So I want to just remind you to start one step at a time. If you have additional questions, you are more than welcome to call me directly. You are welcome to email me. I also welcome feedback. If there are things that I said today that felt off or didn't make sense or were just flat out wrong based upon your experience, I'd love to hear that feedback and engage in a conversation and a dialogue so that it informs me and the information I'm sharing. I learn every day from my patients and families and my colleagues. So this is no different, and I welcome constructive feedback and your ideas or things that really resonated with you. This is another plug. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. Allie, I'm going to come in now.
Yeah.
This is Sarah again from Triage Cancer. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. We're now going to open up for questions. So you can type your questions into the chat box, and we'll get to those and as they come in. The first question that has come in quite a few times is actually, can you get copies of the slides for the webinar? And I'm sorry to say that no, we do not share the actual slides, but the recording of the webinar will be available and on our website by Friday. So you can check back and get the entire recording, okay? So just while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I want to just reiterate the requirements to get continuing education units, because this seems to be somewhat problematic, okay? You need to have been registered for today's webinar. So if you were listening in on another computer, that will not count, and I'm sorry about that. You have needed to be attending this entire thing to get the maximum number of units. So if you logged off early and you're not here to hear me right now, you will not get the maximum number of units. And you need to complete the evaluation that I'm going to redirect you to within 1 week of the webinar, okay? And then there's another thing I just want to mention. If you logged in and are using a phone for this, that's great, but I will need you to put your phone number in an email to me or, well, to info@triagecancer.org or on the actual evaluation, because I have to match up the phone number with the person, and when we see a phone number come in, we don't know who that person is. It's a little confusing, and I'm sorry if I've confused you with that. But anyway, we'll handle it. So, do we have any other questions coming in right now? I don't see one, but one that I know has come up before, Allie, is you touched on it, but the real issue I think a lot of people have is addressing this with their husband, who might be a reluctant person to talk about the relationship, and in that men just are reluctant to talk about relationships in general, let alone when there's a crisis. And how do you overcome that hurdle in and of itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's such a huge one is, especially if you haven't been part of a couple that has a lot of really strong communication skills, or that's where you connect with, it can be really daunting to try to figure out how you're going to start to communicate about things that are really big, scary, and personal. So some of what I would suggest is to start with baby steps. And to clue your partner in with what's happening. So you don't want to have all these ideas about what you're going to do and then show up to your partner about to make a whole bunch of changes and they're not clued into anything that's going on. So starting with transparency, and you can simply say something like, "Hi, Sarah, I just listened to this webinar today and there was a lot of really good information about building and strengthening the coupleship, and I realized that communication is something that we could benefit from doing a little bit more about. And I want to know if you'd be willing to have a conversation with me, and we can start even with 10 minutes, because I think that there are some things that I need to say that would feel really good if you could listen to me." So again, you've kind of said what you're hoping for. You've used I statements. You've asked if it's okay. A lot of times what we do is we just start a conversation and keep going all at the same time in the same breath without asking if this is a good time for the other person. So kind of setting up time, setting up expectations, and sometimes setting time limits can be really helpful as you're building into this and as you're practicing this new skill. As a clinical social worker, I can talk nonstop. I can have a conversation with the best of them. However, not everybody can meet me at that level. And so it can be important for me to set a time limit with someone to say, "I'd like to talk to you for 15 minutes. And you can literally set a timer, and then you've set up the expectation, you know how long it's going to last. And the other part is also, what do you expect out of the conversation? What do you expect from the other person? If you just want them to listen, say that. If you want feedback, say that. Because if you do all this divulging of your deepest, most sensitive heart, and then you're left kind of holding all that, and your partner walks away, that's going to feel really bad. So if you want them to respond, let them know that. If you don't want them to fix it or be a solution person, tell them, "I don't want you to fix this. I just need you to listen to me talk." So there's a couple of tricks in there that hopefully have answered that, but starting to communicate with someone feels really daunting. And do it anyways, because you got to start somewhere. And you will learn. If it goes really well, you'll learn and you'll do it again. If it goes really bad, you will learn and you will do it again. Be willing for it not to go well, but know that communication is really important, and know why you're trying to communicate, because that's going to help you stay motivated and clear on why you're going to keep trying and being willing to move forward. This person loves you, and they want to hear from you, and they want to understand you, and you're not necessarily asking them to fix it. So that was a very long-winded answer, but hopefully there was a couple nuggets in there for each of you, regardless of where you're at.
Great. Thank you, Allie.
Sure.
And we also got another question here is, are there any good resources or books for couples to help with communication during cancer?
I don't have any off the top of my head, but I can certainly think about that. I would imagine that there are some. I think that there are some books. I've referenced some resources or some articles in this but I didn't necessarily use any books. And so that's a gap on my part that I apologize for. I'm trying to think also the way that we could get this to somebody, resources. Sometimes you can just start with a Google. Communication skills are communication skills with or without cancer, but you can certainly use your professional hat or your personal experience to add the cancer piece in to adapt it and translate it for yourself.
Great. Okay. And the person who asked that question, we can get back to you. I have your name here, so we'll get back to you if we find any books that are specific to that, okay?
Perfect. Yes, thank you.
I got one chat here that does not make sense to me. I don't know if you're recommending a book. It says L:(LIVS). If you could clarify what that means, that might be helpful. Okay, well, it seems like I think your presentation was pretty full and there's not a whole lot of questions here. So let's move on to the next slide, which is the contact information. Again, if you have any questions about today's, you can contact us at info@triagecancer.org. You can see our recordings of the website, of the webinar at our website. And always, please like us on Facebook and talk about us on Twitter and check out our blog. And our blog is especially relevant now in these times of crazy change with the healthcare laws. Okay, and the next step is I'm sorry, hold on one second. I got an answer to my question there. Livestrong Foundation has excellent resources. So for anybody out there, that is the resource that was recommended. And again, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to redirect you to that survey. So please fill out that survey, especially if you are looking for CEU credit. So thank you all again. Thank you, Allie. This was wonderful. And
thank you. I appreciate it.
Next month. And just again, a plug that next month it is the webinar subject is intimacy and sexuality, which really does dovetail into today's, and it is the subject that we all get squirrely about, as Allie mentioned. Okay, thanks a lot. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Allie, are you still there?